We are recording. Welcome to Window Gazing Podcast, the podcast where two TikTokers try to stay on the same subject for any period of time. Today is a special episode. I have on Sarah Bigman, and we are going to talk about narcissism. Sarah is the founder of Healing Human Integrative Health. Did I say that right?
Perfect.
Yes. She is a functional medicine practitioner. She's also a licensed mental health therapist. And Sarah also has a podcast by the same name, the Healing Human Podcast. Sarah is also, I call you my best friend, and I know you prefer like one of my best friends. So I'm just going to say, like, I know a lot about you because we talk a lot, and I'm so excited to have you on.
Thank
you. The reason that the other thing I wanted to say is if you would like to support this podcast, I would personally love it if you would support us on Patreon. That is the best way to support this podcast. You can also engage with TikTok videos. Sarah's also on TikTok, which is how we met. And most of the guests that I'll have on are also TikTokers. So anyway, that's all the intro stuff. I wanted to talk to you about narcissism, because you have a very good handle on what it is, how to identify it. And when I first met you, I was in a relationship with a narcissist, and you helped me see it, get out of the relationship, get better. And you continue to be like a big, just positive influence in my life for like my own well-being and like my self-esteem, honestly. So like kind of the first thing that I want to talk about is like, what is a narcissist? What is our definition for this?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for such a lovely intro. And I know you are one of my best friends. And yes, I say it that way because I have other friends who might be listening to this who feel similarly. Me with my special way of saying things. But yeah, narcissism. So, it's a very popular thing nowadays to say narcissist and to throw that around. And I know even people on TikTok get mad about that, saying we can't say this person's a narcissist or we can't say that. I think it's so hard because the DSM tries to make everything be one very specific way. So by this definition, you are a narcissist. By this definition, you are borderline. By this definition, especially for personality disorders, it's never that simple. So when I think of narcissism, I think of all of the components that flow into it. So there's people pleasing within narcissism. There's parts work within narcissism. There's an exiled part. There's a inner child part. There's trauma. There are so many pieces that make up a narcissist that I don't think the short answer to the long answer is I don't think there's a one definition of narcissism, but the best way I can put it is somebody who really struggles with their inner self-worth for whatever reason, where it could be due to trauma, it could be to, their own mental health struggles, and they have kind of exiled this part of them that allows them to show and care for others and have empathy. And it is, in my opinion, an extremely protective response to be a narcissist, so much so that the person usually isn't aware of it and therefore can cause quite a lot of damage to others because of the way that they do not have insight into their own emotions. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely, yes. My like sort of quick definition of a narcissist, and I cheated because I looked at what Wikipedia said, is like someone who is abnormally self-centered to a degree, and in an unconscious way, to a degree that it hurts other people. And what I see with narcissism now, and really wasn't aware of it before, is like all of my emotions matter and yours don't at all.
Yeah.
And what I see in patterning in like relationships is narcissists always end up in relationships with people who are willing to take all of the blame, and they don't take on any of the blame, right? So they have a need for whoever they pair with in relationship, that person needs to be extremely good at taking on personal responsibility for things. So um it's so funny because you'll send me TikTok videos. You're like, oh, this person seems narcissistic, like just like helping me identify it, you know? And
Yeah.
so the person that I was in a relationship with, like my primary narcissistic person that I've been in a relationship with, luckily I've only, I think, had one. And for the people listening to this, for the listeners, I want to try to help you identify if you are in a relationship with with one of these
Hmm.
people, so that we can help you like protect yourself, basically.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the person that I was in the relationship with, who was a narcissist, I watched their TikTok videos last night briefly, and I
Mm,
was like, oh my God, I see it. I've
yeah.
never seen it before.
Hmm.
And so I'm curious if like you know what you're looking for, because you can identify it so well. Like, what do you see in this person that you can know it right away?
It's a really good question, and even in preparation for this, I was trying to think of that because I figured you might ask me based on the fact that I do send you those TikTok videos, and it's so funny because I'll just come across someone on my For You page, I'm like, "Ooh, narcissist," and I'm like, "Elsie, look," or
Yeah,
Brown,
yeah.
look.
Ah!
Uh, Brown, look, I sent you this video, right? To show you that this person is presenting in a certain way. And for me, I think it stems from my hypervigilance too, because, I'm sure we'll get into this, but there's a lot of back and forth between someone who has been traumatized and a narcissist and how they fit like a little puzzle piece. And so for me, I'm very hypervigilant. And I feel like because I grew up with a narcissistic parent, I can really notice like instantaneously facial expressions that are kind of not aligning with what they're saying, like body language cues. Sometimes I notice that people who have narcissistic personality disorder have different eye movements than other people. Like I think um, sorry, my brain's going on a tangent now of how to also include neurodivergence in this. But, um, I think when we're being empathetic, when we're being caring and understanding, there's a way that I think our eyes look. And I don't even know if I can put words to this, but it's sort of
Mm,
just there. You can see emotion behind the eyes. Um, and I would say that even for people who are neurodivergent, I would still be able to see empathy behind the eyes.
mm-hmm,
And it's almost like this blank stare that I see as this massive protective part that is just like, we will not allow emotion through. Um,
mm-hmm.
and it's very evident now, but I, similarly to you, have been in relationships with people where I did not see that happening. Um, and looking back, just like you looking back at your ex-partner, I can now see that as well from a time that I even said to one of my exes, I had two, so that's fun.
Mm,
But one of them, I said, we were in like a fight at one point, and I said, like, look me directly in the eyes and tell me, whatever it was that I thought he was lying about. And he looked me straight in the eyes and told me, and I was like, ooh, that's not a good sign. And then
mm,
proceeded to, you know, forgive that for other various reasons of my own healing journey. Um,
mm-hmm.
but it's really hard to tell. I would say the main things are they open to just on a basic level speaking about emotions? Do they have the emotional capacity to speak about it? And again, I think it's important that we bring in the line of like neurodivergence here because there's also difficulty with that for a separate reason, right? Of like interoception and like emotional awareness. But from my experience of being neurodivergent and being around other people who are neurodivergent, there's still empathy there and like a desire to understand and a desire to want to learn for most people versus I think a narcissist who's truly struggled to even want to engage in a conversation, like a lot of shut down immediately. Um, I think another thing that I always bring up is DARVO. Have you ever heard of that before?
Mm-mm.
So there's like a really, it stands for deny, attack, or reflect, DARVO, victim offender. And it basically means that they engage in this type of communication if there's a problem. So let's say you were bringing something to me and I was the narcissist in this case, and you were saying, you really hurt my feelings when you said XYZ. I would deny, I'd be like, I didn't say that. Right. I did not say that. I didn't do that. You're making it up. That's the attack part, right? So you're making it up. You always think that I make things up. What's wrong with you? Reverse victim offender. Now I'm making you the victim or the offender instead of the victim. You did this wrong. Why are you always bringing problems up in our relationship? Why are you always making me out to be the bad guy? What's wrong with you and your past that you come here and tell me all of these problems that I have? So a DARVO pattern like that is very intrinsic to a narcissist because it's their ability to go, whoa, emotions, I can't take that. Here you go. You take that back, and kind of just pass it along to you. So that was my long-winded way of saying, I think these are my couple ways of observing. What have you noticed in the lessons you've learned of how to notice them as well?
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, that was so good. Like, I was applying it as you were saying it to the person that I have dealt with the most that has this pattern. Absolutely. I want to distinguish too, because I know that two of your partners have like this narcissistic pattern. One of them ostensibly a very emotional person, the
Mm-hmm.
other one not in touch with their emotions at all. So you can
Yep.
have a narcissistic personality that also seems very outwardly emotional. My person, um, they would always say that their emotional responses to things were logic, and that my emotional responses to things were irrational. So they
Mm-hmm.
would always stand behind this, like, well, I am the picture of rationality and logic, and you are being
Mm-hmm.
this emotional being, when in reality, he was being emotional, I was being emotional, but he would never acknowledge my emotions as real. His
Yeah.
decisions were always the real ones, they were always the logical ones. And whenever I would try to bring up to him that he was being abusive, or he was doing something that was manipulative, he would always come back to like, no, we talked about this, you're falling into your trauma again, you were. And
Mm-hmm.
he would use a lot of therapy language,
Yeah.
right? He was very good with like, you're falling back into your trauma because you're seeing me as an abuser, and we've already agreed that I'm not an abuser. I'm just logical, right? Just totally invalidating. And
Mm-hmm.
if I could go back to myself at that time, I would have said, like, believe yourself. Don't be the person who is willing to take on somebody else's reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hold your own reality. And I wasn't able to.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm really proud of the all the long far way you've come from being able to notice it in your healing journey. But we can talk about that on a different podcast. But um, I was gonna say to that effect, um, you know, the narcissist has a tendency to do that as a protective part too, which is that protector comes in and says, okay, we have learned at some point that it is not okay to be an emotional person. And that could again come from trauma. I mean, usually is related to trauma. With both my exes, it was where they were told not to be emotional. And there is a reason more men are narcissists than women, because they're
Mhm.
told from a young age no emotions, right? So at some point that part gets exiled in the back, right? That means we can't touch it, we can't look at it, also known as shadow self or whatever language. And that protective part truly does make it so that they do only have their logic brain on. Like the emotional brain is exiled, they cannot
Mhm.
access their emotions. And so there is some truth to when that person says, like, I'm being logical. Like, yes, but a true logical person is someone who's able to use both parts of their brain to put things
Yes.
together and validate and be an empathetic, person who doesn't have these exiled parts that they're fearful of coming to the front. So, in the inverse of that, I often work with clients who have borderline personality disorder, and they present with the opposite problem. They've exiled their logical part and they act most from the emotional piece. And so sometimes you see the combination of those two interacting, and it really is
Mhm.
just two different traumatized parts that have been pushed to the back with a different protector in the front. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and it's so interesting you were speaking to the kind of dead eyes, because when I was looking at this ex of mine and the TikTok videos, I was like, okay, yeah. What I'm mainly noticing is I can tell there's a constructed performance going on.
Yeah.
And there is not a minute, like a moment by moment connection with the emotional response.
Mm-hmm.
And I had never noticed that. Or like I'm a very intuitive person. I'm very connected with what people are feeling. I can see it all over their face, but I had never
Yeah.
connected that with the narcissism. And so if you would have talked to me before, I would have said, well, I can see that an act is going on. Yes, but a lot of people are doing acts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it sounds like the main connection that I needed to make was, there is not a connection with the emotional self. And that's part of the act. Everybody may be doing an act, but there is emotional connection behind the eyes in some way.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's really hard to describe that. And I'll give it some more thought and come back to it if I find more words to describe it. But I think ultimately it's trying to understand. I mean, any sort of relationship is trying to understand like what part of someone is exiled, what part of someone is the protector, and how is that showing up in combination with how you need them to. And so I think, there might be some people in relationship with narcissists who are okay with that dynamic because they have their own exiled parts that match up well with that person. Um, and that's been an interesting thing for me to deal with as a therapist when I see this dynamic playing out. But for most of us who are more, kind of in touch with our emotions and intuitive and, even empathetic, it's a very hard dynamic to be a part of because we can see through that mask, like you were saying, which is, I
Hmm.
think, a problem that you have run into before, which is you see it, but you also see through to the other side. And underneath that mask is someone who's very wounded and who is very
Yes.
traumatized. And sometimes, right, when we're traumatized, we relate best to other people who have also gone through similar things. And so I think, at least from my experience, what drew me to some of my exes was I could see that they get me. They like understand that hurt, and I could see through it to the other side, but they couldn't. And that's where the disconnect
Hmm.
was.
Such a good, such a good explanation of that. Um, I had a thought and then it totally went away, but it's not fully gone. So I'm just going to keep talking until it kind of comes back. Because we were talking about like narcissistic relationships. I think one of the oh, I remember what it was. You're talking a lot around parts work. So I just want to, for the listeners who are not
Mhm.
familiar with parts work, this is internal family systems. It comes from mainly the book No Bad Parts. There's another practitioner, I've read his books. Um, it's escaping me. He wrote a book called Symbiosis and Autonomy, and it's like internal family systems, but it's his own system. Anyway, he has the kind of same thing. So here's what the parts are. There is a traumatized part of us that happens in a traumatic situation. That part needs protection. It's very hurt, it is wounded. And so that part gets tucked away and we try to never experience it. It lives deep inside us. There is now another part that has split off that needs to protect that part. The protectors are usually the ones that are causing the most problems in our lives. They're the ones that create the narcissism, any personality problems. All they're ever doing is spending all their energy trying to protect the wounded part so that the wounded part can never see the
Mhm.
light of day. And then there is a third part that is the healthy energy, the healthy part of the self that has still survived and been allowed to kind of grow up. And so whenever I'm doing parts work, I can identify, okay, what's my like healthy energy doing? What's my sometimes I call it my adult, like what's my adult energy
Mhm.
doing?
Yeah,
What
I like
is
authentic.
yes.
Mhm.
And then what other voices can I experience here? I might experience a voice that's like screaming and saying like they don't love me, they're not paying enough attention to me, etc. Right? There
Mhm.
is somebody who needs something, right?
Mhm.
And then there's another person in there who their job is to quiet that person down. No,
Mhm.
no, you don't have needs. You got to shut this down. Nobody's going to love you if you express your needs. So there are warring parts inside us. And
Yeah.
that's all that internal family systems does is it helps us identify the protectors, what are their goals, identify the exiles or the wounded parts, help them feel loved and accepted and integrate. And the way that I understand traumatized people now is just having more fractured parts of you
Mhm.
than other
Exactly.
people. More healthy people, less mentally traumatized people don't have as much fracturing. I think they still do have some fracturing.
Yeah.
The more trauma you've been through, the more fracturing you have from every instance that you were traumatized. Is that the way you see that?
Um, Yeah, I wouldn't say every time you experience trauma, there's a fracture, but I would say that usually there's fractures around the helplessness that was felt at the time of the trauma, and therefore protectors are developed to, it's I love parts work because it's so positively focused, no bad parts, all of our parts are trying to help us. So each time we were going through something and we felt alone and we didn't have the resources we needed, a protector was developed.
Yes.
To do its best job to make us feel safe, to make us feel heard, and keep us from feeling that awful feeling we felt during the trauma. So it's not like a full, every time there's a trauma, there's a break in the self, but it is more common, this now is a little tangent, but like for someone with DID, for example, that is more breaks in the self, essentially.
What is DID?
Sorry, dissociative identity disorder. So what we
Mm-hmm.
think of as split personalities, and unfortunately the disorder that's been portrayed in movies very incorrectly and
Mm-hmm.
shows, but that's essentially just many, many splits of the self.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that's just an important understanding here. And we are not saying that narcissists are not people who
Mhm,
deserve love. However, most of you who are going to be in relationships with narcissists are the type of people who will take on everything, take on responsibility, and try to help someone uh, get better. And that is not your purpose in relationship.
mhm,
Your purpose in relationship is to be loved and to have a happy life.
mhm,
And if you're in a relationship with someone who will not take emotional responsibility, they need to go to therapy. Narcissists are they're not functioning in empathy, and so they are very difficult people to be in relationship with. Um, and I will not pair with narcissists anymore. I don't
mhm,
know. I really don't know anyone who has been through a narcissistic relationship, a relationship with a narcissist, who would sign up for that again.
mhm.
I think that we pretty much go, you need to go to therapy and start taking responsibility for yourself. Um, and it seems like a fundamental part of a narcissist that they are kind of like incapable of taking responsibility for their behavior. So, how do people
Yes.
even get diagnosed?
Mhm. Um, well, the part around, I mean, to me, it's very clear when someone's a narcissist. So you walk into my office, I can see it on TikTok video in 2 seconds. You walk into my office, I can diagnose you. So that
Yeah,
part
yeah.
is a little bit easier. But um, the piece around not being able to take responsibility for itself, it's the biggest protective part that I have ever seen, right? Like there are protective parts that use substances, there are protective parts that self-harm, there are protective parts that try to keep you in place by giving you depression, right? And those are all big protective parts. The protective part of a narcissist is massive. It is,
Mm-hmm.
we will not get through. And so in order for somebody to heal, it is really hard to bring this into their awareness because that protector won't even let it come into awareness.
Yep.
So by sitting there and trying to explain this, that protector is going to blank face that. What are you talking about?
Yep.
This therapist is crazy. That, it's going to just kind
Yep.
of darvo it back and forth. So I've only worked with a handful of people with NPD, but a lot of it has to do with playing to the protector, right? So, what does the protector want to keep this person safe? So, how can we bring the authentic self forward so that the protector feels like authentic self can take care of this person, can keep them safe, and protector can back down maybe just a smidgen to
Mm-hmm.
examine what's going on? But that can't happen without the protector trusting the other parts a little bit more, because a lot of that stems from like not trusting authentic self or adult self or whatever you want to call it to be able to feel emotion, right? Because the inner, wounded, usually inner child, wounded, exiled part couldn't and shouldn't and doesn't, they don't want them to. But can adult self do it?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. And usually that plays a little bit to the narcissist's ego self of, well, of
Mm-hmm.
course I can. What do you mean? Of course I can do anything. Yes, I can feel
Mm-hmm.
emotion. Okay, let's try it, right? And that's where you get the in.
Um, the other the other thing that I wanted to sort of ask you, or ask you to like differentiate for me, is I know that you have experienced like a lot of different narcissistic relationships in your life. Can you differentiate for me what it would look like to be in a parent-child relationship with a narcissist versus a romantic relationship with a narcissist? Do you think those are very different?
I think they're different the way they look, but fundamentally pretty much the same. So with my parental relationship, it was and is very much my needs matter, yours do not. And it was a very tough environment to grow up in with a parent that was not able to be a parent. Because I think a fundamental part of being a parent is being able to address your child's needs, no matter what they are, whether it ranges
Mm-hmm.
from food needs, sleep needs, basic human needs to emotional needs. And so, what that looked like for me growing up was I can't ask for anything. I can't cry. I can't be upset. I can't express emotion because this parent always has to be the one to take up space. And, that created definitely sort of that. I don't know what word I want to use to describe myself, but that like people pleasing, I think, response of like, oh, okay, my role in life then is to make sure this person is happy. And it's really easy when you have learned that your whole life to go into your first romantic relationship going, okay, my role in relationship is to do whatever this other person wants, right? And like just allow them to make the choices and allow them to take up the emotional space and allow them to do all of these things. And so my first relationship outside of, when I was younger, was very much that way. Like I always say that ex was a carbon copy of my parent. And it's repetition
Mm-hmm.
compulsion to an extreme because it's just what I knew, right? Down to the way that they would threaten self-harm, down to the way that they would,
Mm-hmm.
just really take up the space, especially if something was wrong with me, like if I was sick or if I had a
Mm.
need that was out of my control, right? So I think in some ways it can be very similar, especially through the repetition compulsion piece. The ways that I think it's different is my relationship after that, which you kind of talked a little bit about, was narcissistic in a completely different way. And so walking into it, I was like, this is different, right? Because the first
It's
person was
very
very
emotional.
explosive, was very
Yeah.
emotional, me, very outwardly, like what I think people think of a narcissist. The second relationship had no emotion. And so, of course, coming from one traumatized experience to the other, I'm like, no emotion. That sounds great. Yes, let
Yes.
us get on board with that. Um, but it was no emotion because he was not allowing himself to feel any emotion or experience any
Mm-hmm.
emotion. And so it was kind of just the other end of the coin where on one hand, it can look very me. And on the other hand, it can look very rehearsed. I don't know what other word to use, but kind of just like he was always had a face on. He looked a specific way in public. He wanted people to like him. He paid for everything because he wanted to, to be known as someone who had money. So it's kind of that other end of the coin of like, I am important, right? That like grandiosity, but it was quieter. It was like not something that someone would notice unless they're in direct relationship with that person. So
Mm-hmm.
did that answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Really important to know that like a narcissist can show on all side, like all parts of the emotional spectrum, but the essential mechanism is my emotions matter and yours don't. I am
Yeah.
the center of the universe.
Mhm.
I wanted to talk about kind of like what led us into our narcissistic relationships because I think it could be really helpful for anyone who is like trying to understand their patterns. So I guess I'll just speak to like what my patterns were in relationships and how they progressed. Like my early patterns coming out of my trauma and my heartbreak was to be, I was in a succession of relationships where the person couldn't see me. I would choose people who could not connect with me emotionally, who made me feel like pretty safe and who I could kind of boss around a bit. Maybe not in a narcissistic way, but just in a way of like, you'll never see me and I'll be very safe here because you will never uncover what I'm actually thinking.
Mhm.
Very emotionally disconnected way to be in relationship and very numb. Um, After coming out of a succession of those relationships and being very confused about what love was or about what connection was, I was like, well, I'm going to try to let someone in who I actually do like respect and admire, right? Which
Mhm.
is very new to me. Usually I would let people in who I didn't respect
Mhm.
so that they couldn't hurt me.
Mhm.
They couldn't hurt me. Um, so that is when I met my narcissistic person, and I was absolutely obsessed with him. I was really obsessed with his logical ways, right? Really
Hmm.
obsessed with like his intellectualism.
Yeah.
And I thought he was like a genius and like this such an amazing, like impressive person.
Yeah.
And I was really looking for someone to be my sun and moon and like the center of the universe and someone that I could kind of worship, honestly.
Hmm. Yeah.
Um, and because of my daddy issues, like I have always been really confused about what like healthy masculine energy is. And what I was thinking that it was is like, I really want someone to like direct me and to like,
Hmm.
okay, let's go over here. Oh, that's
Hmm.
interesting that you said that, but I actually think this is what it is. So let's, I'm going to be your leader, right? And I
Mm.
was like, ooh, I love that. That's so sexy. Like be my leader, like female containment, like that whole thing. And that's what led me to the narcissism. It's like I was attracted to this, like, I'm the boss of you energy,
Hmm.
honestly. And I think that it's what I like in people because you always tell me, like, you like narcissists. I don't know why. Like, you really like that energy in people. And I
Yeah.
do. And it's what I'm like, that's leadership energy.
Yeah, kind of.
So, anyway, that's what led me to him. And obviously, it's the thing that caused all the problems later on. And I know that
Hmm.
you were very obsessed with one of your narcissists. So I'm curious to hear what you think
Yeah.
led you into the relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I think I spoke to a little bit of this already. I mean, my first one was straight repetition compulsion. I mean, it was exactly which, for anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's just trying to relive another traumatic or difficult relationship pattern with someone else in the unconscious hope that you will solve that wound. So, for me, it was a narcissistic parent who never allowed me to express my needs, express my wants, really have a voice. And there's something that happens when you grow up without a secure attachment where you are unconsciously trying to do it again, but this time there's this belief that like I will do it right this time. I will people please better. I will, whatever it is. And so I think unconsciously that was my drive for my first relationship, which was, oh, this is familiar. This is safe. I know how to do this relationship, right? Like I know how to be the person who doesn't have needs. I know how to be the cool girl. Back then too, I was 18, 19, 20. I was trying to be the cool girl also. So there was a lot of mix
Mm-hmm.
of that of like, this is a really easy way to do that, right? Um, and then I think with the second partner, it was kind of exactly like you said, not so much looking for leadership, but by then I was burnt out from growing
Mm-hmm.
up with an explosive person to dating an explosive person for 5 years that I just loved that the second person had no emotions. It was a great break. And, I
Yep.
stand by that. I don't stand by the fact that I dated, two narcissists back to back and didn't take time to self reflect. That's my cat banging on the door. Sorry. But, I definitely don't regret giving myself an emotional break at the same time. So that's why I said, it's a weird thing to say, oh, everyone narcissists are bad. Yeah, I think long term they're not great for your health if they're not working on themselves. But sometimes you, I needed that 2-year break, to be honest. Wasn't great, didn't have a healthy relationship with him either, because when I did have emotions or I did have needs, he wasn't receptive.
Yep.
But it wasn't an explosive way. It was just in like a shutdown way of like, oh, let's see something's going on with her. All right. It's just
Yeah.
this like inability to comprehend. Um, and so I think there's a lot of things that can lead someone into a narcissistic relationship, but the core of it is always what's going on with me that I feel I need an avoidant person in my life. Why am I feeling like I need to have somebody who is not respecting me? That's always the core.
Yeah. I end up in a lot of avoidant patterns with people too. And I know that the pattern that always leads me there is the feeling within me that someone's not paying enough attention to me, that someone's not attentive enough. And my soul just wants to work on that lesson over and over. And so it looks for people that will bring that feeling out in me. And it drives me freaking crazy.
Mm-hmm.
The feeling of like someone's not paying attention to me. And so I'm not lovable. Right. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
the way that relationship patterning works is like we love to pair with people who push our buttons and then
Mhm.
to work on that lesson over and over again. And a lot of being in a healthy relationship for me has been to give up on those buttons and to be like, I don't need to experience these buttons anymore. I don't need to
Mhm.
experience these emotional
Yes.
tones anymore. I'm going to choose someone who feels really safe and steady and loving. Um, and we are both now in relationships with people who treat us like princess queens. Like
Mhm.
we feel so well treated by these people. We feel so validated. And a lot of that, like me getting there, had to do with me being willing to take up space. Because
Yeah.
if you had talked to the 2020 me, I would have been like, well, I don't deserve to take up space. Who am I to be treated like a princess? If someone had
Mhm.
treated me like a princess, I would have felt very uncomfortable.
Right.
And now when I get treated like a princess, I'm like, yes, thank you. Very deserving of that.
Yes, you are. We are, and all the listeners are too. But I think, with that also comes, and I think I said this to you right when you first started dating your current partner, where I was like, welcome to a healthy relationship. You're about to find out all the ways you suck.
Yes.
And I mean that, and I mean that in the most loving way possible. But part of our desire sometimes to stay in unhealthy relationships, narcissist or no narcissist, is that it is so much easier to spend our time focusing on all the problems that person has and spend our time drained from dealing with this other person and drained from dealing with
Hmm.
their issues. And, when you talk to your friends and family, oh, I'm just so tired because this person and this person, and it's so much easier to externalize it. When you finally decide, okay, I'm going to try to engage, like you said, I'm going to just shift the pattern and I'm going to try to engage with someone who isn't my natural type, but is treating me well. And, all of a sudden you see all the areas that you have to work on as a person. And I think that's something that's not talked about a lot in like this discourse of leaving a difficult relationship to a healthy one. There has to be some willingness to put in self work in that time. Cause that's when I started realizing all of the places that I had internalized narcissistic behavior, not necessarily saying that I'm a narcissist, but how had I watched that it was appropriate to get mad? I watched it was appropriate to get
Hmm.
mad by screaming and yelling and cursing. And I had never had anyone tell me that was the wrong way to handle it because my narcissistic parent sure wasn't doing it. My exes sure weren't
Hmm.
doing it. But this healthy person absolutely told me I was not had a boundary and said, I will not stand for that. Right.
Yes.
And that's where I was like, oh, I am acting inappropriately, right? And that takes time to reflect of like, I internalized a pattern of this is how you get mad, right? And it takes time to kind of work on that and willingness to work on that. So I do think sometimes people get stuck on that where they're like, but this is so much work. And it is, and it sucks.
Yeah. I think I don't know, people who are the kinds that take on everything, take on all the responsibility, are much easier to work with than like the narcissist. So kind of going back to what I said is like, if you're ending up in a relationship with a narcissist, you're probably providing the complementary personality for that, which is somebody who takes on everything. So
Hmm.
usually people who have these patterns are all from traumatized families, family patterns of trauma, alcoholism, abuse, etc. And they are two different types of people who gain control over the world in different ways. The narcissist
Yeah.
gains control over the world by blaming everybody else and
Hmm.
by not having emotions.
Yeah.
And their unconsciousness is, I am good and everybody else is bad. And so they never are really able to self reflect or work on themselves fundamentally
Hmm.
until they soften a bit. And the person who's the complement for that is the person who gains control over the world by taking responsibility for everything and by
Absolutely.
taking everything on and by people pleasing everybody and
Hmm.
feeling an undue sense of control over other people by how they manipulate people, mainly with making them like them.
Yep.
um so that is more of a fawn response, but both of these come from trauma responses.
Yeah.
And the other way that you could say that is the narcissist is the more avoidant person. They are avoidant of intimacy, and the sort of uh, complement for that is the more anxiously attached person. They are more pursuing of intimacy. They're more emotionally connected. But the sort of like, I call it the codependent side. I don't know if that's like official therapy language. But that person can like be reasoned with because they can self-reflect.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been so hard for me with that kind of patterning because most of my work is like, yeah, it's kind of somebody else's problem and you don't have control over that. And I hate that
Mm-hmm.
answer. I love the idea that I am kind of the person that does have control over this behavior. And it turns out that I was just kind of like choosing not really the right partners for me, partners that
Mm-hmm.
didn't make me feel safe. And I was responsible for those
Mm-hmm.
choices. I was responsible for staying in those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and in my healthy relationship, like you were just saying, like you'll see all the problems that you have. um the main problems that I see coming up are like my avoidance side. So the ways that I run from intimacy, the ways that I still show up fake.
Mm-hmm.
I am faking my emotions sometimes when I don't even realize it. And it's because there's some protective part of me that says you need to be having this response and you're having the wrong response. You're having the
Mm-hmm.
wrong emotional response.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes back to autism too, because
Mm-hmm.
I never seem to have the right emotional response to things. And so I learned early on that, like, okay, we need to see how everybody else is reacting, and then we need to have
Mm-hmm.
that reaction.
Mm-hmm.
That can get me really twisted up in romantic
Yeah.
relationships too, because I'm like, you're supposed to have this reaction. You're supposed to feel love here. You're supposed to
Mm-hmm.
feel like connection here. And sometimes I don't
Mm-hmm.
feel it. And a lot
Mm-hmm.
of people don't make me feel safe to express that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, One of the reasons that we have connected so well, you and I, is because we have sort of opposite emotional patterning. So, like, my emotional patterning is super internal and it's full of filters, and yours like needs more filters. Like
Yeah.
you're more external. But we both have sort of had that pattern of like, oh, I'll just take everything on and be responsible for it. And that's great because I'm very responsible and effective in the world. And
Mm-hmm.
not surprising that we both have burned ourselves out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not surprising at all that now we're just dealing with this burnout from everything we mentioned on this podcast and then some. So,
I have been watching mainly ladies, it's a lot of, there's a, like you said, there's a reason that more men are narcissists than women. I think that there's a reason that more women gain these more like highly responsible, highly effective personalities than men do, because a lot of like our gender training. But I've been watching a lot of the girlies who are like chronically burned out.
mm-hmm.
God, and a lot of us have this pattern. And I'm like,
Yeah.
wouldn't it be great if like the answer to that was just that like we're freaking doing too much, we're like in
Mm-hmm.
control of too much? It's got to
Yep.
be a part of it.
Absolutely. I mean, it definitely is. And I think that's also part of learning to be in a healthy relationship after being in one where not only did we offer to take on everything, but then we were also told to take on everything, like the emotional load, household load, everything, right? But um when you're in a healthy relationship, sometimes I think it can become stressful. At least for me, it's become stressful sometimes to give up the mental load. Like my partner is more than willing to take on things, but I am
Hmm.
so used to getting this sense of control through the world of controlling things that it's hard. So I'll say something, really simple like, can you clean up the dishes tonight? But he doesn't do it exactly how I would want to. And so now I just don't even want to ask him to do it anymore because I might as well just do it the
Hmm.
right way. Right. So there's a lot of relearning to relent control and still feeling safe. And that's been a really big lesson for me in my current healthier relationship. And knowing that I don't have to do that because this other partner is going to be there for me and going to emotionally respond to me, whereas my other partners and my parent didn't.
Yeah, we're getting a little bit off of narcissism, but that's fine. That's kind of the theme of this podcast. We go into other topics. But I think so like domestically, women complain a lot that their male partners are not like doing enough. But I happen to think that most of that work is on the side of the over functioning woman. And
Mm-hmm.
it's mostly because in family systems, not internal family systems, but in family systems, when they teach you how to effectively fight, they teach you about overfunctioning, and they say the
Mm-hmm.
pattern always is that the overfunctioner has to let down some of their energy so
Mm-hmm.
that the underfunctioner can step in. And
For sure.
I've been thinking about that a lot in like domestic patterns, and it's mostly on our side when we're doing too much to like let it down and let the
Mm.
other person who is an adult like take responsibility for themselves and do some stuff.
I know you
It's
said
so
that's
hard.
not it's not applying to narcissists, but I think you can apply that to narcissism and being in a relationship with a narcissist by saying the same thing, right? Which is like you also, for us, I know a big part of both my relationships with narcissists were like, I can see through them. I can see the other side. I can see where they're good people. I can see the hurt self. I can see the authentic self because it would shine through. I think that's an important part to notice too, is like, it's not like they're 24/7 being a shit person. They're also like, there are places where their authentic self would show through. And so I think to say that we also have to relent the control of this is an adult person who, you know, also has the responsibility to do their own healing work and to move along their path, whatever it may be in this lifetime. And so for us to sit there and make our whole life story about trying to control our safety through controlling them is ironically exactly what the narcissist is doing. But
Yes.
like you said, through a completely the other side
Different
of the coin.
lens. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for anybody who feels like they may be in one of these relationship patterns, what was healing for me was to invest my energy into myself, to pull it away from the obsession with them and controlling their behavior. And my answer to you, if you would have said that to me, was, well, I can't because they are X, Y, and Z threatening my safety, my bank
Mm-hmm.
account, etc. And so I would say to you, as the voice of reason, okay, well, you need to draw back into a place where they can't do that to you because you should be focused on your own life. You should be investing energy into your own self-esteem, your own like self-care, and to be spending so much time on someone else is a sign that you are in your own kind of a trauma response.
Mm-hmm.
And so healthy relating is that everybody takes care of themselves. Everybody takes responsibility for their own emotional patterns,
Yeah.
but not over responsibility for other people's patterns, which is so hard for people like
Mm-hmm.
me because I just want to take responsibility for everybody and see everybody's pain and make it all okay.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, I had to step away from that person. And the further that I got away from them, they could not blame me for their problems anymore because I was fundamentally not involved in their life. And
Mm-hmm.
I saw once I got away from them all the things that I had been blamed for, especially my emotional truth. I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God. As soon as I stepped away from this person, I had clarity. And I could see by stepping into their field how confused I started to feel.
Yeah.
They would twist everything around. They would make it seem so like everything was my fault. And then once I gained separation, I was like, okay, they were the
Mm-hmm.
person that was doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really tricky for me to accept too that they had some conscious level of doing manipulation to me.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I still want to believe that it's totally unconscious.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, I could still step back and say, this person needs to take responsibility for their life. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to go find someone who seems to be able to take care of themselves. And that's the other part of it too, is like when we're pairing with a narcissist, one of the things that attracted me to mine was like, he was unemployed. He was very emotionally like depressed and angry and stuff all the time. And like, it was nice to have a project, it was
Mm-hmm.
nice to have someone to help. And in my own insecurity, I realized like, I kind of wanted somebody who was going to be not fully okay because then nobody could steal them from me, like he could be mine. Right. And that's
Mm-hmm.
my own sick sense of insecurity is
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, interesting. I'm attracted to somebody that I think that I can control because they're not okay,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're not healthy. They're not
Mm-hmm.
somebody that somebody else would want to date, right?
Mm-hmm.
And um just being real with all
Mm-hmm.
of your patterns and realizing that like this is how we undo like generational trauma. This is how we, and as long as we can have a basis of like self-reflection and honesty with ourselves, like all these things can be undone.
Yeah.
um my experience with my healthy relationship is just like, wow, it's this easy, huh? That's
Mhm.
all I had to do was go out and find something that felt easy and then work on accepting that. That is very boring. It doesn't feel like there's any work in that. Um,
Yeah.
and all the work is just on myself and like kind of being alone and like, wow, I feel really lonely right now. That's
Mhm.
interesting, but I'm fully loved. Why do I feel lonely? Um, and I don't know. In a way, it was kind of nice to have this endless project that could never be finished and never be solved, right? It was an unsolvable problem with the
Yes.
narcissist. And there was
Yeah.
always this feeling of like, once I solve this, then it'll be the
Yeah.
fantasy land,
Yes.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that being said too, you were kind of saying something before around like did they care, did they not, did they know they were manipulating me, did they not? And I think part of the narcissist game is to catch you in that and then keep you that way because you are
Absolutely.
trying to figure it out, you are trying to see the authentic self, right? But I think the healing for me came when I was like, it doesn't matter, it doesn't
Yes.
matter. I don't need to keep myself in this back and forth because at the end of the day it is keeping me in a place of insecurity when I could be with somebody who does not cause this back and forth with me in my mind. And, you and I even just talked about this, I think literally yesterday, how this relates to where I'm at with my parent relationship too, because I think this same thing applies to a parent who's narcissistic, where you can spend your whole life, let's say the parent does something good for you, right? Like they buy you something you want or they spend time with you and it's fun. And you're like, all right, well, do they care about me then? Like, are they trying to meet my needs? And you can have that same back and forth.
Yeah.
And it took me a really long time, but eventually I was able to get to the place where I was like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they're trying to be good or not, if they're trying to manipulate me or not, if they know they are or not, right? They are at the end of the day. And my experience is valid. My experience is real. And I get to take that information and do what I want with it and decide if I want to be around this person or not. And I think that's
Hmm.
the power. That's when you finally get to the place where you're like, oh, okay, like this isn't a game I need to be involved in.
And I think that that is how we will find more healing for narcissists. I think one of the primary problems is that there are people who are willing to be in relationship with narcissists still.
Mhm.
And uh, one of the very helpful things is that they have lonely lives eventually, if enough people are healing and like, oh, I'm not going to engage with you. They will be drawn to find what is wrong, and hopefully they'll end up in therapy. And it's a very similar thing that we talk about with like domestic issues and like men not putting in enough effort. Well, if enough men are not engaged with because they're not putting in effort, they will eventually try to figure out what's wrong with them.
I'd
um,
hope so, but I cannot guarantee that.
I don't know, I'm so proud of people who are in their healing process and who are sort of cutting people out of their lives. And like some
Mhm.
people put up walls and they don't engage with their parent anymore. Some
Mhm.
people set up boundaries where they say, I will not engage with you if you do X, Y, and Z behavior. One of the best ways to sort of call out a narcissist, or like to actually, it'll like repel them usually, is just to try to hold the truth of your experience. This works especially with parents where you're like, this is what happened to me growing up and it was really upsetting to me and I don't like how you completely invalidate it. And the parent will go, well, I was doing the best that I could, so what do you expect from me? And you
Mhm.
go, well, I expect you to take responsibility for what happened to me because I'm a person who has emotions and like I'm important. I'm your child.
Mhm.
I will not just accept any treatment.
Mhm.
And that will throw them into anger. It will throw them
Yeah.
into like, tossing and turning. And it'll do the same thing to any sort of narcissistic person that you're in a romantic relationship with. And if that repels them, if going, hey, I'm a person who has emotions and like I need to be respected. If that repels someone, then that's not a good sign.
Absolutely. And I will also
Yeah.
add to that just to like kind of play the other side of it too. Like they're not all narcissists are, well, okay, I think all narcissists can have abusive behaviors, but I just wanted to say that not all narcissists, are like physically abusive, for example. But if you are in a situation with a narcissist where there is physical abuse, like you also are allowed to keep yourself safe by not also challenging that narrative too. And instead seeking like resources in your community. I just, as a therapist, feel like I need to throw that in there as well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
There are also, maybe this goes without saying, there are no physically abusive situations that aren't acting from some kind of unconsciousness.
Hmm.
I don't know if there are people out there that believe that there's like healthy ways to be physically fighting with people. Also, just like total emotional manipulation. There's no emotional manipulation that operates in any sort of healthy range.
Hmm.
All healthy communicating is like communicating truth,
Hmm.
um, basis of talking about emotions, and like needs are clearly stated
Hmm.
rather than trying to get needs met in backdoor ways.
Yep.
um, I'll just tack on to that. One of the best ways to identify like trauma bonds and traumatic ways of relating with people is to see if people are trying to get their needs met in backdoor ways, if they're
Hmm.
not clearly stating their needs or clearly
Hmm.
aware of their needs.
Yep.
So
Absolutely. And I think that I'm gonna maybe tangent, we'll see how this goes, but related to that, I wanted to ask what your thoughts were on, I was thinking the other day, I was like, narcissism is also a form of repetition compulsion because I think it is a way of trying to get a need met. And hear me out. I'm gonna try to before I can how I can say it. But if repetition compulsion is the idea that there was an original wound and we're trying to replay it so that we can win or we can feel better, we can solve the original wound, right? Let's say, I mean, this was at least the case for my second narcissist, where, he had an awful relationship with his mother from day one, really, really rough. And I think a lot of what he was playing out was trying to make me be like her, like essentially belittle me, belittle my emotional state, belittle my intelligence, so much so that I was now just like mom. And because he was the narcissist in this dynamic, he was the winner, quote unquote. And so I
yes.
do think there's a piece of narcissism that is super similar to, like we were saying, like the people pleasing side or the empathy side or the codependent side, where both of us are repeating a pattern and trying to win. And I think in that situation, no one is ever going to win. Like it is just not possible, like you said, to get your needs met through repeating an unconscious pattern. And so I think for me, at least when I'm working with people in therapy, bringing awareness to that is like the first step of like, this isn't going to meet your needs. You can repeat this to the day you die if you want, but it is going to stay the same. And so we have to actively get your needs met through a healthier route.
So you think their repetition compulsion is basically they were in a parenting relationship where the parent expressed to them there is a good side and a bad side in relationship, and you are on the bad side and I'm on the good side. So what they tried to do is find someone that they could be on the good side and they can make the other person be on the bad side. Is that kind of what it is?
I wouldn't say that's always the case, but I think it can be the case sometimes, right? Where it's like, like I'm really just speaking from what I know of my second, the second person I was in a relationship with, but his mom like belittled him and put him down and said some of the most heinous things to him that I've ever heard. Um, and so I think, of course, that makes someone feel very small. And so the reaction to
Right.
that could be one of two things. It could be, I'm an awful person and I should never deserve anything good in the world, or it can be, F this, I'm the best person in the world. I'm going to develop this narcissistic lens where I don't feel bad. I don't have to feel anything. I'm the best, actually. And so I
Yes.
think to win that dynamic would be then to be in relationship with somebody where they are the small one. They are the little one. They are the one who doesn't, mean anything and is nothing. And so I think that can be how the repetition compulsion piece comes about, where it doesn't solve the original wound, though, right? Like you still have that wound with your mom. And ultimately, it doesn't help to just continuously belittle other people out in the world. So,
Yeah. I'm trying to think of my narcissist. I want to talk through this just a little bit because I know a lot about his relationship with his mom. Again, terrible relationship with his mom. His mom was very unconscious and narcissistic herself. She barely knew that she had children. It was a very like we talk about this like kind of like Gen X was raised as like latchkey kids.
mm-hmm.
So she would like on one hand say that he was the most amazing child ever, that he was like this gifted child and like, oh my God, you're a genius. And then she would like totally neglect him physically and
Yeah.
emotionally. He wasn't fed. So he got two opposite bits of information. Okay, I'm the most amazing person ever. And somebody's doing something that's outwardly
Mm-hmm.
abusive to me. So I understand what love is just like total neglect and abuse.
Yeah.
So I don't understand how that would be a repetition compulsion for him. But yeah, I'm just like verbally processing this a little bit.
Yeah.
And one of the things that you wanted to bring up, I know, is like that narcissists seem to have this like pretty heavy people pleasing part of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very true for the man that I was in a relationship with too. He had almost no self-esteem. And so
Mm-hmm.
all of his self-esteem was constructed. It was fake.
Mm-hmm.
And with almost everybody that he would be in the room with, he would be constructing a personality for. And that was very exhausting for him. And he had a very hard time having different friends in a room together because he was a different person with every single one.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, and all of that was born out of his insecurity, his
Mm-hmm.
inability to be his authentic self. And he knew that he was doing that. Like I would talk to him about it, like, yeah, you're just kind of like a different person with everybody. And he was like, well, I don't believe that I have enough worth to be myself. So obviously I have to be somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, going back to the first thing you said, I could definitely see how having splitting from a parent like that could create a repetition compulsion. Again, I'm not saying this is the case for every narcissist. I just think it can also be the case for some. So that's why I said in my original definition, right? Like, I don't like the way the DSM just says this is what a narcissist is, because it can come from so many different angles. But if he's getting the messaging of, I'm amazing, I'm great, I'm the best, but not getting his needs met, wouldn't it then make sense to portray that with somebody else? Like to do that to you, for example, of like
Mm-hmm.
love bombing, you're the best, you're the best, you're the best, but your needs don't get met. I don't want to hear about your emotions. I don't want to
Yeah,
hear
yeah.
about are you hungry? I don't want to hear about it. Right. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like the same, it's the repetition of just like what they know as love with the goal of, it's an unconscious goal. It's not a conscious goal, but it's like if I can be the one, it's a power and control thing, the same way that people who sometimes are physically abused end up becoming the abuser. It's the same dynamic in the sense of like, if I can win, if I can be the one in control, then the original wound will be healed, but it's not the
Yes.
case.
Right. Yeah, that makes so much sense. If I can be the one, if I can be the center of the universe, then the original wound will get healed. That makes so much sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I am beginning to tire. And I think that I brought up everything that I wanted to bring up. And I'll just reiterate that anybody who thinks they may be in a relationship with someone like this, it would be great to get into your own therapy if you're not already and have like a sounding board and a therapist like Sarah. I'm sure you've worked with many people who
Yeah.
are going through this and you are able to say to them like, hey, I think you might be in kind of a narcissistic relationship and you might be helped by mostly getting out of that relationship for the most part.
Yeah, but I think
Yeah.
it's not always, unfortunately, it's not always that simple too. And I think it's okay to take time with it, right? Like even if you hear this podcast and then you're really motivated, that's awesome. And give yourself the space and time to process all of that too, because again, it's a lot. It's a lot when you're enmeshed with somebody, whether it's a parent or a romantic partner. It's hard. It's hard because your own attachment wounds are involved, and so are theirs. So it's not a simple 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. Very good advice. Do you want to say again where people can find you or what they can look you up on?
Sure. I think the easiest way to just find me if you want to see more of my videos or anything would be TikTok. I'm at SBBIGS, You can also find me on healinghumanintegrativehealth.com or my podcast on Spotify, Healing Human with Sarah Bigman.
Very good. And I am featured on Sarah's
Yeah.
podcast because we're friends. So
Yes.
also you'll find an episode with me there. And we were talking about chronic health issues. I don't know how to say that. Anyway, yes, thank you for being on. And I am going to stop recording, but don't go away just yet.
Okay.